I think it's important to realize that dementia is a disorder of the brain. It's a loss in mental abilities, and it's a severe enough disability to interfere with a person's daily life. The majority of adults over 65 don't develop dementia, and I think when we're working with older adults, we need to remember that it isn't normal for people over 65 necessarily. And in fact, only 11% of those over 65 develop dementia. So when you look at the total population, that's actually a pretty small percentage. Mm-hmm. It's important to remember that dementia is not a part of normal aging. And it can be a condition of its own or a symptom of a disease or illness. We work with many folks that live a very normal life into their very old age. And I think one of the classic examples is George Burns that we saw that lived over 100
right.
and still was pretty fast to give a joke or
right.
to...
He certainly slowed down as he aged, but he was certainly still very vital until the end.
Absolutely. I want to tell you, Barbara, about two types of dementia. And I think it's important to remember that there are two types of dementia. The symptoms of the dementias are the same, but there are two types. And one is called reversible dementia. This type of dementia can be changed, or more importantly to remember, reversed. And that's why we call it reversible dementia. It can be reversed or gone back. The resident that you work with will be able to return to normal if they have a reversible type of dementia. But the other type of dementia is called irreversible. And this type of dementia cannot be reversed. A person with irreversible dementia will progress and will eventually worsen. And we'll learn more about that. Dementia can cause the loss of the following mental abilities. And I'd like to talk about that. And maybe you can help me think of some examples for some of these
Sure.
things. The first thing is impaired short and long-term memory. And I'd like to first talk about short-term memory, and maybe you can think of an example as I'm telling
sure
about that. The short-term memory is something that might have happened an hour ago or even yesterday, but it's something that was in the recent past. Can you think of an example maybe for that?
Well, I'm doing this all the time as I take off my glasses and put them down, and then I run around the office wondering where I put them.
I think I remember you doing that just yesterday. The other type of memory is called long-term memory. And these things happen longer in the past, or maybe from a person's youth or childhood. And these will be this type of memory, this long-term memory, will be the last to go in a person. In other words, a person first will show deficits in that short-term memory, that memory of an hour ago, or like you were just saying with the glasses. But the long-term memory will be intact or with a person until very late in the stages of dementia. The other loss that we see when someone has dementia is the loss and the deficit in impaired thinking abilities. And what that means is areas of understanding, reasoning, judgment, and difficulty learning new things or new tasks. And when we're working with older adults with dementia, we need to remember these areas and know that they may not be able to remember how to brush their teeth or comb their hair even. They may not be able to make the best decision making. And for instance, if they're being asked to purchase something from a salesman, they may not make the best judgment and may be taken advantage of. And unfortunately, we know in today's world there's folks that prey on these folks. And finally, we see impaired language skills and communication. Can you think of an example of maybe that a person that has dementia and has problems with their language skills or communication?
Well, a person might hear what you're saying but not respond appropriately. You may be telling them it's time to eat, and they aren't getting up and following you because you've said it's time to eat, and they don't know that the first step is to get up and walk into the dining room.
That's a good example. One of the other examples that I think of often is a resident that I worked with that couldn't think of the name of a particular food item. It happened to be Jell-O, and he would call it jiggler all the time and ask for jigglers. And in fact, he was asking for Jell-O and just couldn't think of that word.
Sure.
So we need to be real creative. I'd also like to tell you about some other changes associated with this loss of mental abilities in dementia. And these might include personality changes. We might see a person that was always very kind and considerate, gentle, begin to use vulgar language, may begin to just act out and just not seem the way they were before. That might be a real sign of dementia. The inability to do activities of daily living. Maybe you can give us an example of that.
I think this is a real important example because when the dementia, when the confusion or thinking problems start to interfere with activities of daily living, things that we're used to doing, then we have to start being concerned. An example might be somebody who's dressing inappropriate for the weather. If it's 90 degrees outside and they're still wearing a sweater, or if they're walking outside in the winter without putting a coat on, not using good judgment that way, and something that should be just part of normal living.
Right. Things that they did all their life and knew that was right and wrong. Good. Changes in how the resident interacts with others might be another sign. For example, somebody might become paranoid or suspicious of one of their fellow residents, or one of the coworkers, or one of the workers or caregivers that's caring for them. They may begin to say to them that they're stealing their prized possessions, their favorite quilt that they had on the bed, or a favorite item in the room. All of a sudden they're suspicious that people are stealing from them, or poisoning their food. If you're a caregiver and you're trying to give somebody some medication, they may claim you're trying to poison them or give them some medication that's going to kill them or hurt them.
This occurs in families, too, that the person who has the dementia symptoms may be accusing their loved one of stealing from them or lying to them because they realize something's wrong and they don't want to admit they have the problems. They'll often blame it on somebody else.
Right. And then finally we see some confusion and disorientation. And this means that a person doesn't realize the person, the place, the time. They don't realize that it's really morning when in fact it's afternoon, or vice versa. They may wake up from an afternoon nap and think it's morning time and ask for breakfast. They're just disorientated to that time and place. They get lost often because they walk out of the CBRF and they look back and they don't recognize that as home. In their mind, home might be their childhood home. And I think it's important in working, and I just want to mention this, that when working with these folks, it's important to go with them, I often say, into their world. Their world is very different than ours. And they may be in a world in their youth. They may be living in the time when they were 20 years old and are caring for a family. And we need to help them by knowing that this is okay to be in their own world and just validate what they're talking about. Can you think of any other ways that we might help them in that way?
Well, I think it's important to remember that what they think is real to them, and they're never going to accept what we see as real. So what you said is right. We need to enter their reality.
Yeah, good. Barbara, would you tell us a little bit about the other type of dementia, the reversible dementia?
Right. Reversible dementia can be changed. It can be reversed. It can be reversed. We can go back and make this person, if not normal, more normal in their function. And it's real important that we are aware of that because we as the caregivers can change that. So let's talk about that for a minute. Reversible dementia can be the result of many things, and one can be as simple as a lack of sleep. I'm sure you've had experiences where you haven't had a lot of sleep or enough sleep one night, and getting up the next morning is more difficult. And you may feel even a bit demented because you're not thinking as quickly as usual. You may forget that you were supposed to pick up somebody because you're rushing around to go where you're going.
Absolutely.
So it's real important to recognize that people need their sleep. They need regular hours of sleep, uninterrupted sleep. And we need to provide that for the residents that are living in a CBRF because we can lessen their confusion or their dementia by making sure they get enough sleep. Stress or anxiety can cause dementia symptoms, and we can also reverse that. You've got a good example would be somebody who was just admitted to a CBRF. Can you think what that would be like for a person, John?